As we try to understand the current crisis in the Middle East, we may find ourselves thinking it's simply a matter of determining who's right and who's wrong. But there's much more to the story. With an eye on the human condition, this is Insight. A friend wondering how to understand the Israel-Hamas conflict asked for help. Knowing my background in international relations of the Middle East, she thought I might be able to help. Like so many of us, she's perplexed in trying to resolve the internal conflict of horror at the brutal Hamas attack on Israelis and the hostage-taking, and the ferocious retaliatory response against Gaza, its militants and civilians, by the Israeli military. Is this simply a matter of deciding who is right and who is wrong, or even who is most wrong? To better understand today's conflict, we must first look back at the history of both peoples. We begin with some data points in Jewish history. The capture and destruction of Jerusalem and the land of ancient Israel by the Babylonians led to an extended period of Jewish exile on the Euphrates. Since then, the exile's oath has often been spoken in other times of national loss. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chief joy. Though many Judeans were freed to return from Babylon by the Persian king Cyrus and re-establish society, religion, and culture, the subsequent first-century Roman conquest and destruction of Jerusalem deepened the experience of catastrophic loss. Within a few decades under Roman domination, Jews were banned entirely from Jerusalem. To this day, the Jewish community in the diaspora has annually repeated to itself, "Next year in Jerusalem." This deep-seated passion for land and capital, born of guilt and grief, is but one factor in Jewish-Israeli consciousness. Another element is the 19th century history of Russian anti-Semitism. Rumors that Jews had carried out the assassination of Tsar Alexander II in 1881 brought on organized massacres of Jews in the Russian Empire. The level of local hostility, including rape and theft, often assisted by police and state authorities, accelerated Jewish efforts to create a safe national home. In a response to the problem of anti-Semitism in Central and Eastern Europe, a form of Zionism emerged in the 1880s. It was named after Zion, a biblical word for Jerusalem. Political Zionism helped relocate Jews who wished to emigrate to their ancestral homeland. The long-term goal of political Zionism was the establishment of a state where Jews could live freely under their own government. Once that became a possibility in Palestine, opposition to the project began as anti-Zionism. Opponents included both Palestinians and Jews. For example, many ultra-Orthodox Jews did not regard the Zionist project nor the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 as legitimate. Their belief was that only the Messiah could re-establish Israel in its ancient land. Another factor in broader support for a homeland was the belief that the return of Jews to their ancient land would hasten the return of Christ. This religious component informed those 19th and 20th century British and American political leaders who were instrumental in the eventual creation of a Jewish state. According to Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, theologians who studied the Bible and evangelical archaeologists who excavated the Holy Land welcomed the settlement of Jews as confirming their religious belief that the Jewish return would herald the unfolding of the divine promise for the end of time. In the late 19th century, Palestinian interest in national identity also made itself known. Palestine had been ruled by the Ottoman Turks for some 300 years. Leading Palestinian families had arisen in Jerusalem, some becoming representatives in the Ottoman Parliament in Constantinople. Palestinian-American historian Rashid Khalidi writes that Jerusalem was a significant element in the development of Palestinian identity in terms of the construction of modern national consciousness. He notes that around the turn of the 20th century, parochial loyalties served as the bedrock for an attachment to place, a love of country, and a local patriotism that were crucial elements in the construction of nation-state nationalism. At the beginning of the 20th century, without willingness to recognize the need for equitable coexistence, these two peoples were set on a collision course, an inevitable clash between political Zionism and the long-established Palestinian presence. Anticipating victory in the First World War, Britain and France signed the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement, plotting to divide Middle East and Ottoman territories between them. As colonial powers, they were interested in access to Gulf oil, pipelines, and railways across the desert. In the case of Britain, control of the Suez Canal was strategically important as the gateway to British India. The Arab world was shocked when the secret agreement was laid bare, but the British level of deceit was compounded when at the same time they also secretly agreed with the Hashemite leader Hussein bin Ali, promising him an independent Arab state in return for an uprising against Ottoman forces. In effect, the British had promised the same territory to two different parties, hoping to muddle through the consequences once the war was over. But in what amounted to a betrayal, in 1920 the French forced Hussein's son Faisal out of Damascus, where he established the Arab Kingdom of Syria with British help. Adding to the complexity, late in 1917, the British had entered Jerusalem and assumed military occupation of Palestine. The British government revealed its pro-Zionist position by issuing the Balfour Declaration in support of a homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. These complicated events remain central to the situation in the Middle East today. The legacy is one of distrust, conflicting and broken promises, self-interest, and shockingly uneven treatment of the Palestinian people. Following the war, the League of Nations mandated Britain and France to help the local populations achieve self-governance. France would be responsible for Lebanon and Syria, and Britain would administer Palestine, Transjordan, and Mesopotamia. While Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan and Iraq gained independence by 1946, the situation in Palestine continued to be challenging because of Britain's pro-Zionist position and the resistance of the Palestine population to Jewish immigration and British rule. In 1948, when the British formally returned the mandate to the newly formed United Nations, the Palestinians rejected the UN petition proposal, and the Jewish Agency declared the establishment of the State of Israel. Within hours, a major regional conflict erupted, and following 2 years of fighting, an armistice was agreed upon, resulting in the division of territory between the forces of Israel, Jordan, and Egypt. Israel gained 78% of British Mandate territory. East Jerusalem and the West Bank were placed in Jordanian hands, where they remained until the Six-Day War of 1967, while Egypt held the Gaza Strip from 1949 to 1967. The 1948 war, in which surrounding Arab armies invaded Israel and Palestine, resulted in not only the unequal division of land, but also, as noted by Israeli historian Ilan Pappé, the expulsion of half of Palestine's population, demolishing half its villages, and emptying and destroying 11 of its 12 towns. According to Pappé, the Israeli military campaign known as Plan D was conceived as a way for Israel to resolve its Palestinian problem. About 800,000 Palestinians were suddenly forced to flee and live in refugee camps, many in the Gaza Strip. Now under Egyptian control, the dispossessed were not allowed to become Egyptian citizens, nor to migrate to Egypt or any other Arab country, nor to return to Israel or be compensated. As a result, many young members of the refugee camps became active in guerrilla operations against Israel. In 1967, Israel won the Six-Day War and took military control of Gaza for the next 25 years. In 1987, the Intifada broke out as Gaza Palestinians rioted and fought against Israeli troops. This was the year that Hamas formed as a charitable and political organization. Hamas was seen as a religious alternative to the secular Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, whose efforts have produced so little by way of freedom. Hamas was involved in a number of attacks on Israeli soldiers and settlers, including suicide bombings within Israel. In response, the Israeli military imposed very harsh punitive actions, expelling many activists through 1992. This partial history gives some context to Hamas's horrific, premeditated, murderous attack in 2023. Of the 251 hostages, as of May 2025, 146 have been freed, 82 confirmed dead, and 23 hostages remain alive in Gaza. Those released and the medical staff who've treated them have reported cases of poor hygiene, malnutrition, mental, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, and lack of medicines to treat pre-existing conditions. The ongoing Israeli military response has been ferocious and retaliatory. With regard to Palestinian deaths in Gaza, in July 2024, the medical journal The Lancet noted, applying a conservative estimate of 4 indirect deaths per 1 direct death to the 37,396 deaths reported, it is not implausible to estimate that up to 186,000 or even more deaths could be attributable to the current conflict in Gaza. While the history of retribution from both sides might persuade observers to conclude that the record of death and destruction is indeed not a matter of right or wrong, but of who is more wrong, this conclusion will not be enough to take us forward. The novelist and social critic Wendell Berry reminds us, it is useless to try to adjudicate a long-standing animosity by asking who started it, or who is the most wrong. The only sufficient answer is to give up the animosity and try forgiveness, to try to love our enemies and to talk to them and to pray for them. If we can't do any of that, then we must begin again by trying to imagine our enemies' children, who, like our children, are in mortal danger because of enmity that they did not cause. It's also noteworthy that so many of the key players in this long crisis are connected in some way as, quote, people of the book. Whether Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, they make a claim to Abrahamic origins. But as the book says, Abraham was the friend of God, whose way is loving, serving, and conciliatory. In the search for peace, we can do no better than to follow that way. If you'd like to know more, go to vision.org and search for keyword peace. For Insight, I'm David Hume.